For people who may not immediately connect manufacturing and pipeline, can you explain a little bit about how those two fit together?
I think pipeline or pipeline operations really is the logistics backbone of manufacturing. Our production facilities can be very reliable and can utilize world-class technology, but without a reliable feedstock supply and product takeoff, it'll be difficult for them to be successful. Pipeline operations is much more than just about pipeline in the ground. Engineering, reliability, integrity management. There's lots of real-time decision making. So it's truly fascinating.
Welcome to the LYB podcast. I'm Deepi Sidhu. Today, I'm joined by Ruan Farmer, site manager for the Equistar pipeline operations here at LyondellBasell. This episode is actually the second of our three-part manufacturing podcast series. And in our conversation, we'll talk with Ruan about his career, which spans more than 20 years in manufacturing, how pipeline supports manufacturing, the specialized rules behind safe and reliable operations, and how technology is shaping the future of pipeline. So with that, let's get started. Welcome in, Ruan.
Thank you, Deepi. Thanks for having me.
All right, to start, can you tell us a little bit about your experience in both manufacturing and in pipeline?
Yeah, sure. I've spent the majority of my 20-year career within the chemical manufacturing environment. As you can tell, I'm not from South Texas.
It's a different accent that you
That's
have,
right.
yeah.
I was born and raised in South Africa, where I started my journey as a young chemical engineer graduate at a brand new polymer production facility. And this was a fascinating time in my career. And, I don't think young professionals often get the time, or at least back then, to gain exposure that early in their career within a new unit and all the unique commissioning and startup challenges. So certainly an amazing learning curve for me. Since then, I moved into different engineering and leadership roles, still mainly within in the polymer production world, within manufacturing. And that opened the door to another exciting opportunity, being part of an international project team responsible for the design and construction and finally startup of a multi-unit manufacturing site in the United States. In 2020, I joined LyondellBasell at what is now known as our Louisiana Integrated Polyethylene JV facility in Lake Charles, Louisiana, where I served as operations manager for one of the polyethylene derivative units and later on as site technical manager. About 2.5 years ago, I transitioned to Lyondell's pipeline organization, which is known as Equistar Pipeline Operations, or EPO in short, where I currently serve as the site manager, responsible for the safe and reliable operations of all our pipeline transportation, as well as our underground storage assets in Texas.
All right, so I mentioned that in our last episode, and this entire series is really about manufacturing. So for people who may not immediately connect manufacturing and pipeline, can you explain a little bit about how those two fit together?
Yes, I think that's an interesting point. We don't often talk about that connection. I think pipeline or pipeline operations really is the logistics backbone of manufacturing. Our production facilities can be very reliable and can utilize world-class technology, but without a reliable feedstock supply and product takeoff, it'll be difficult for them to be successful. So instead of using transportation methods such as truck or rail or marine movement, pipeline transportation offers us the ability to move very large volumes of chemical materials continuously, very safely and efficiently. And at LYB, we move many different products, including ethylene, propylene, butadiene, pyrolysis, gasoline, propane, and many other feedstocks to and from many of our own manufacturing facilities, as well as many suppliers and customers throughout the Gulf Coast.
When many people hear pipeline, they think of 811, dial 811. So for people that are not familiar, what is that number and what actually happens when you call 811?
That's a very important number for us, and I certainly hope many of our listeners are familiar with 811. 811 is the call before you dig number. So before anyone plans an excavation project, digging a hole, whether it's a homeowner, a contractor, or utility provider, they need to call 811. What happens when you call 811 is that allows utility or pipeline operators like ourselves to respond typically within 48 hours, send technicians out to that location and identify underground pipelines or utilities by physically marking them with little colored flags. I'm sure many of our listeners have seen these colored flags within their front yard or on the sidewalk as they drive through the neighborhood. For example, in our industry, a yellow flag will mean a potential gas line or a gas line or hydrocarbons that we move in our pipelines with an LYB. And a red flag will mean a power or electrical cable underground. So this is a very important part of our damage prevention efforts within the pipeline operation world. Since you can imagine, a very simple digging job can easily turn into a safety incident and a possible impact to our environment or community.
Throughout this series, we've been talking a lot about careers in manufacturing. And for careers in pipeline, what makes pipeline work so exciting? Let's say specifically for someone with an engineering background.
I must say, before I joined, the pipeline organization, I had very little information about pipeline. I must say it's been really fascinating. I think pipeline operations is much more about, much more than just about, pipeline in the ground. It involves very similar aspects that you will find in a production facility. We have engineering, reliability, integrity management. There's lots of real-time decision making. So it's truly fascinating. And how I often compare pipeline operations is air traffic control analogy. Our pipeline controllers, which is really what they are called, sits in a centralized control center, remote from all the pipelines. So they don't see any of the underground pipelines, of course. But they are responsible to control all the flow, all the conditions of multiple different materials in our integrated pipeline network, all the way, all the way from Corpus to Mont Belvieu. So they need to make real-time decisions, sometimes within split seconds. In case a supplier is offline, whether planned or unplanned. And so I think, that in itself makes it very fascinating.
Along those lines, what are some of the unique rules that support pipeline operations?
Yeah, I would say, as mentioned, there are roles that are similar to production, but there's certainly a couple of roles that are distinctly unique to pipeline. One of those are what we call damage prevention. So our damage prevention group is responsible for responding to 811 calls, as we discussed before. But in addition to that, they monitor right-of-ways, which are the areas where, our pipelines run underground. And so they look for any signs that could be indicative of a potential issue in the topology of the area. Another important role they play is they in constant interaction with contractors or excavators and as well the public to educate them about good digging practices. So their main goal is to protect our pipeline assets, but more importantly protect the environment and the community that our pipeline runs in. Another unique example is of an example role is our integrity management group. We have integrity specialists that if I explain it in a simple way, make sure our pipelines stay healthy. The same way that you and I see the doctor routinely to make sure our health is good. They coordinate pipeline inspections to make sure that our pipelines stay healthy. And so these inspections that they do are very sophisticated. They use, very interesting inline tools that we use inside the pipeline without interrupting flow, that provides us data that shows even the smallest weakness within the pipeline. That allows us to make decisions to repair or replace a pipeline. So it gives us a lot of data to help be less reactive and more predictive.
Well, two things that stand out in particular are the regulatory environment and the fact that pipelines often run beyond the traditional site boundary. So, this includes areas like the Houston Ship Channel. What should people understand about that complexity?
Yeah, so I think both of those topics really highlight some of the challenging and complex nature of the pipeline. So, like you mentioned, our pipelines are not confined within a boundary, very much like our production facility. So our pipelines runs, as I mentioned earlier, all through the state of Texas, through communities, through high populous areas, and as well through sensitive areas such as waterways, including the Houston Ship Channel. And so, and what that means is, pipeline infrastructure is heavily regulated, and for good reason, right? And so, we manage and use very robust programs to help us maintain our pipeline integrity. If we find issues within some of these sensitive areas, we have defined protocols what to follow, as well as if we make repairs or replacements. We use prescribed techniques to help us replace those pipelines. So I think ultimately, the fact that our pipelines are everywhere, it's very important for us to not only stay within compliance to all those regulations, but look for ways to constantly improve. Use technology, as I explained earlier, to help us gain insights as soon as we can. We often use the phrase "find things small and fix them small." So find a potential issue with one of our pipelines and make the necessary repairs before it becomes a larger challenge.
That really leads me to my final question, just talking about technology. Looking ahead, how are technologies like drones, AI, advanced analytics really starting to affect and change the pipeline industry?
Yeah, that's very exciting. I think technology is moving the way we operate within the pipeline in a big way. We operate a fleet of drones within Equistar pipeline operations. Some of these drones have amazing capability. We use them to survey and monitor right of ways. We can use these drones to detect issues that we as humans cannot see. So some of these drones have infrared capabilities. They can find potential things again, like we cannot see. Even dead vegetation, for example, which is something that may be indicative of a small leak. And even the data we use from these drones and from pipeline inspections, some of the software programs we use have very fascinating analytical capability, and also with the help of AI to crunch the mountains of data that we have, to help us make the right decisions faster. So I think that's very fascinating. I don't think the technology will necessarily replace any of the fantastic people we have. The operating discipline that we apply, in all our programs, utilizing this technology, I think is still very important.
Yeah, you said fascinating, and I would agree. Fascinating insight indeed, Ruan. Thank you so much for your time today and all of your insight into the pipeline industry. That's going to wrap up another episode of the LYB podcast. To learn more about manufacturing and pipeline operations at LYB, visit lyb.com and be sure to subscribe to the LYB podcast so you don't miss a future episode. Thanks so much for listening.